I got a request through to do an updated heavyweight rankings video, and typically in the past I've done this kind of every 6 months, and I was about due to do one again actually, and I thought now's a good time to do it really. First and foremost, we have the new year, and secondly we had all the big heavyweight action this week, and a lot of the rankings have changed as a result, so I've spent a bit of time going over them and I wanted to put them into the form of a video, which I'm going to upload. I'm going to upload one at a time, and then I'll create a playlist which I attach to my homepage. At present, because I'm filming off an iPad for this video, I can't upload videos that are longer than 15 minutes in duration, so I'm going to have to do it in separate videos, I'm afraid. There'll probably be 4 parts, 3 parts, 5 parts, something of that nature, so please bear with me. I'll upload one at a time, and I'd be interested in feedback. Leave your comments below. Is this something you're interested in? Is this entertaining to do every 6 months, or am I wasting my time? I'm quite open-minded to it. So before we get into it, firstly, how I rank. This isn't going to be a head-to-head rankings, right? I'm not saying that the 7th best boxer in my rankings is the 7th best heavyweight. I'm saying based on form, based on what they've achieved, the wins they've had, the losses they've had, this is how they look. You know, this is how my rankings are. Rankings for me are based on achievements, not the eye test. Eye test only comes into it if you've got 2 fighters with an incredibly similar level of form, and one of them's blowing out opponents, whereas the other one's split decisioning them. You know, that's when an eye test comes in. But for me, it's about getting the victory for us first and foremost. So, if you beat a top 20 fighter, that gets you highly ranked than if you destroy a top 40 fighter. And it's as simple as that into my rankings. Let me just give a few honourable mentions. These are guys who didn't make it, and I'm going to run with a top 30 in the heavyweight division. The date today is January the 19th, 2016. So these are my rankings based on January the 19th, 2016. And I'm running with a top 30. So a few guys who didn't make it. Amir Mansour. He'd probably be 31st, you know, he's very, very close. I toyed with putting him in, just didn't quite see the breakout victory for him that got him into the list. Johan Depar, again another guy, borderline top 30, just lacking that big name victory for me. And a few of the up-and-comers, Hughie Fury, Dillian White, Andy Ruiz, you know, these are all guys who can get into the top 30, they're just not there yet, they haven't had that marquee win. Finally, Erkan Tepe. You know, Erkan Tepe definitely top 20 guy, let alone top 30, based on form achieved. But on the basis that he's likely to be serving a drug ban and therefore inactive for a substantial amount of time, I've decided to exclude him from these rankings. Clearly, he can re-enter, dependent on his circumstances. So let's crack on. I'm going to start with rank number 30, and I guess I'm going to start straight away with a controversial one, because I know a lot of people rate this guy a lot higher. But number 30 is Lucas Browne. Why is Lucas Browne number 30? It's because, name Lucas Browne's best 3 wins. You know, you've got an ancient James Toney. You've got an unproven Richard Towers. You've got an Andre Rudenko, who Hughie Fury beat with much more ease than Lucas Browne. You know, people think Andre Rudenko won that fight. Yeah, I was half tempted to score Hughie Fury above Lucas Browne actually, based on the eye test, but I stuck true to what I said at the beginning of the video, and I thought Hughie Fury's overall resume was weaker than Lucas Browne, so I went with Lucas Browne at number 30. You know, Browne's fighting Chigaev next up. A win there, yeah, that brings him into top 10 conversation. But Chigaev is a massive step up, and he needs a fight like that really to boost him up the rankings. He needs to hurry about it as well, because he's not getting any younger. Mariusz Wach, number 29. You know, Mariusz Wach is probably best known for his defeats to Vladimir Klitschko and Povetkin. He performed with credit on both of those nights. He also has some solid form to an extent. You know, one of the main wins, I guess, is his one-punch KO over Christian Hamer. You know, Christian Hamer isn't a heavyweight who makes my top 30, but he's there or thereabouts. You know, he'd certainly be top 40 in my rankings if I was to go further than 30. I haven't, so I'm not going to specify. But, you know, he's in the mix, Christian Hamer. Mariusz Wach's one-punch knockout of him and his defeats with credit to Povetkin and Vladimir Klitschko, you know, he's just performed at a slightly higher level than Lucas Browne. So even though Lucas Browne, I would say, is a higher upside, based on form in the book, I'm going with Mariusz Wach at 29. Another controversial selection is number 28, because I know a lot of people would write this guy out, but it's Cristobal Areola. You know, I know Areola's had some close fights recently against lesser opponents, but if you actually look at his resume, there's some decent names in there. Obviously, again, he's a guy who's possibly more known for high-profile losses, but you know, he lost to Bermain Stavern, lost to Klitschko. But if you look at relatively recent wins, you've got Seth Mitchell, who he stopped in definitive fashion. Travis Kaufman, who had certainly a very good record numerically coming into that fight. Eric Molina, who he stopped in far better fashion than Deontay Wilder. And even though recently he's been out of shape and not performing at peak level, I still think Areola's in the mix. You know, I still think he's in the mix. He was competitive in the Stavern fights until, you know, times of stoppages, and I still think he's there or thereabouts in the mix, and a dangerous opponent for a young prospect if the prospect isn't 100% solid, as we saw in the Seth Mitchell fight. Number 27, and I'm just looking down at my notes here. I've gone with Thomas Ademic. Now, initially I didn't include Thomas Ademic in my rankings because I understand that he's had retired from the sport. But upon further inspection, he'd had a comeback fight recently, and it appears he is having one further run at it. You know, Thomas Ademic dropped down the rankings massively due to losses. You know, likes of Glasgow, Spilka, you know, those sort of guys. But he's still on the list at number 27 based on the more historic form. You know, his form with Eddie Chambers, his form with Steve Cunningham. That's class form. You know, a lot of the young up and comers haven't got form like that on their copybook at all. So I've got Thomas Ademic at 27. He's a guy whose next fight will probably put him out of the top 30 conversation or put him right back in the mix again. At number 26, and this is a controversial selection, is Arthur Spilka. And this is one where I am rating him largely on eye test. You know, Spilka's resume is dodgy, isn't it? If you look back and you just have to say who the best three opponents Arthur Spilka's fought, it's you know, you're struggling. You're struggling before you begin, really. So the reason I'm rating Spilka so highly is because of the credit that I give him for his win over Adamek, and also because of the eye test with how he performed in the Deontay Wilder fight. You know, I thought he was giving Deontay Wilder some real grief in that fight, and he went up in my estimations as a result. You know, Deontay Wilder, there's a lot of debate as to how good he is, but he's certainly a higher ranked fighter, let's put it that way. And I thought Spilka's performance against him, combined with the form Spilka does have, however scratchy it is, means he did enough to be ranked 26 in my rankings at this point. Number 25, and again this is a controversial one because we're talking about a guy who got stopped very, very early and in terrible fashion in his last fight, but it's Francisco Pianeta. Whilst Pianeta had a really rough time against Chigayev recently, you look at his performance against Vladimir Klitschko, you could see he's an individual of some calibre. An earlier win on his resume against Johan Depar. Yeah, I thought he maybe did a better job on Depar than Erkan Tepe did. You know, and as I said, Erkan Tepe's a guy who'd be right in the mix here if it wasn't for his drug ban. So, yeah, he's one who, again, his next fight is going to be really, really pivotal, because if he was to suffer another loss like that, he's totally out of the conversation. But with the context of today's heavyweight division, he's also not, you know, he's not a million miles out of the mix and out of the conversation if he comes back, has a decent win, and, you know, gets back involved. Number 24, I'm going with Alexander Ustinov. You know, the loss to Kubrat Pulev, where he effectively quit because he was being outboxed, did show his limitations, but there's some decent-ish form on his record. You know, he's got the wins against all the typical journeymen you'd expect: Konstantin Eretz, Travis Walker, Jason Gavern. Obviously, he had the most famous victory, I guess, which was against an aged David Tua. He's fighting Luis Ortiz next time out, and how he does in that fight will obviously be key going forward. If he were to get an upset win, he'd be you know, entering a top 5 conversation. He really would be. He's not afraid to put himself out there. Obviously, he agreed to the Tyson Fury fight, so let's see how he does. He could potentially change. Number 23 is Eddie Chambers, a guy who's really, really struggling to get a big fight, and because he hasn't had a big fight for so long, I haven't been able to rank him higher than 23. Clearly in terms of ability, clearly in terms of peak performance, he's well above that. You know, very decent win over Dimachenko, Calvin Brock. I think he knocked out Derek Rossi. You know, we've seen Derek Rossi cause some real problems to guys who are actually rated higher in this list than Eddie Chambers. Obviously, Chambers has had his losses as well. Thomas Adamek, Klitschko, Povetkin. But again, he's performed with immense credit there. You know, went to the 12th round with Klitschko, was causing Povetkin problems early on in their fight, etc. So, you know, Eddie Chambers for me, he definitely makes the list. Yeah. Moving down, the next opponent to bring in at number 22 is Joseph Parker. And Joseph Parker at 22 may upset a few people. I know some of the governing bodies rate him a lot higher than that. I know in terms of a head-to-head ranking, he'd certainly be higher than 22. He looks like a real solid fighter. But at this point, there isn't the marquee name. There just isn't. Which top 30 fighter has Joseph Parker beaten? Which top 30 fighter has Joseph Parker been in with? The level of opposition recently in Bergman and Daniel Martz has actually gone down. So I find it hard to rate him higher than 22. I think some of his form, Brian Minto, Jason Petaway, Sermon Williams, is just about high enough to, Cali Meehan obviously is his biggest win actually, and it's the Cali Meehan win that allowed me to rate him at 22. But at this point, I couldn't have him much higher than that. I'm going to cut the video there and we'll upload a second part later. Let me know your thoughts on these initial rankings. Just to recap, Lucas Brown at 30, Walk at 29, Areola at 28, Adamek 27, Spilka 26, Pianetta 25, Yushinov 24, Chambers 23, Joseph Parker 22. Thanks for watching.